Welcome to the party as well. I'm Julie Foudy, one of the co-hosts and MCs for this event, and we are very excited for this session regarding the Commission on the State of U.S. Olympics and Paralympics, because here is your chance to sound off to Commission leadership, which, by the way, is the first listening session they've done since being seated by Congress. So this is very cool and important what we're doing. And questions like, what resources do NGBs need to better support youth and community sports, you may ask? How can they more effectively coordinate activities with school programs and local providers? How can they help with coach recruitment and training, abuse prevention, best practices in sport and program development, or other areas of need? All things that we've been talking about during these 2 days. And to lead this discussion, please give a warm welcome to Professor Dionne Koller, Director of the Center for Sport, Director of the Center for Sport and the Law at the University of Baltimore School of Law, and co-chair of the Commission on the State of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. Joining Dionne are Kathryn, Carson, Chair, USA Gymnastics, member, NGB Congressional Commission Task Force. Big round of applause for Dionne and Kathryn. Next to Kathryn is Ron Nocetti, Executive Director of the California Interscholastic Federation, CIF. I know a lot about, played for that for a few years in high school. And finally, on the end, last but not least, Renata. Renata Simril, and CEO of LA 84 Foundation. It is a big honor. Dionne, take it away.
Thank you. All right, can everybody hear me, and everybody hear me on the live stream? Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. So what the goal is for today is really to listen. There were prompts that these folks were given in the listening sessions that they led and facilitated, but we don't want to circumscribe. We don't want to sort of prejudge any topics, so you're free to share with us what you want us to know. And our staff are here in the room and listening in, taking notes to bring all of this back to the commission and make this a part of our work. So, Kathryn, I'm going to start with you. Okay. What do we need to know?
First of all, thank you so much for leading this important work to give us all a chance to sound off, as Julie said, about what's going on in the world of Olympic sport. I just was in an NGB breakout room, and so I'm going to try to share with you the key insights of how NGBs, working together with grassroots sporting organizations out there, are thinking about all this. And I think, first of all, it's so inspiring to be here and to see the mosaic of organizations that are trying to help our children and keep them healthy and bring them along in youth sport. And I think in the room, one observation that I made is that we really don't understand each other's roles and what we do very well. I think national governing bodies are honestly an incredible resource of subject matter expertise and education and a lot of other things. And so one of the things that we kind of committed in that room to do is more outreach to everyone out there in the world of grassroots sport to make sure you know what resources are available through us, because I think there's a lot there. In addition to that, I think there's, some people think that we don't necessarily do much at all in the area of grassroots. And I want to clarify that every sport is different. Every NGB has a different approach and a different size and different resources, but the vast majority of NGBs really do have membership programs and structures that touch athletes at a very young level. And it's not all about bringing them through the channels to become Olympians. Obviously, only a few will ever make that. Lily spoke up. Lily, my CEO at USA Gymnastics, spoke up in the session and just pointed out that really our mission is not only to help these athletes have the right technical skills, but we really want them to set them up to succeed in life. And so hopefully people will begin to realize that we're not just the Olympian makers, but we really believe in our hearts, as all of you do, about keeping our children healthy. So there was a lot of conversation about that. I'll try not to be too long here, but I want to point out that we also really see ourselves as leaders in safety. Obviously, we have a federal mandate to fully comply with everything that Safe Sport is and the Center for Safe Sports Programs. And, make the observation that really we're keeping athletes safe in a way that is not happening in the rest of youth sports. So we believe that's an opportunity for examination. But we have lots of resources that we would suggest that all of you come forward to share we're happy to share them. Again, don't want to go on and on here. Our big takeaway is we need to figure out the right mechanisms to communicate more directly with more people in this community, to share the information that we have.
And Kathryn, what I'm hearing also is when you're talking about youth sports and NGBs and touching, in that vertical structure, I heard you say, and the rest of youth sport. I think there's also a lack of clarity, or am I hearing you say there's a lack of clarity around NGBs in your jurisdiction, but there's a whole lot of grassroots sports going on that is not part of that, and there's a lot of misunderstanding around that.
There absolutely is. I mean, we've talked here about just getting kids out to play. That's kind of something that we probably will never touch. I think most NGBs start to touch children when they're beginning to compete, and that's kind of what we do. But we're certainly open to doing more. But we may need some more resources to get that done.
Thanks for that. Ron, I think we can all identify what high school sports are. We know sports occurring in schools when we see it. But what did you learn in your session?
In our session, and it was really school-based people in the room, and it's a great segue when you talk about how we need to inform people better. Many people weren't necessarily aware of all the resources that are out there and available to them. So I think that was one of the key takeaways. But I think, it came down to sports for all, and it was about access and opportunity were the main themes of our group. If none of you have been to a Special Olympics unified event, for example, it's an advantage you have to take, an opportunity you have to take advantage of. Everyone at the event has fun and enjoys it. Parents are supporting children on both teams. Even the referees are having a good time at these events. And then Paralympic events, which I think we're starting to see more at the high school level. It's about inclusion. It's about inclusion of everyone. And so our para-athletes are incredible athletes. We just saw a young woman at our state swimming championships swim 100 meters with really the use of very limited use of her legs and the use of one arm. And it was a learning moment for everyone involved. When you see all the students at a state championship event, whether it's swimming or track field, stop what they're doing to watch and to learn and to feel like that's what sports is about. I think that's something that we would like to see more support from the highest levels for high schools on how to start those kinds of programs at the school level. And then just education about Olympic-based sports. We only, as you heard in the last panel, I think it was Evan Moses said that you only hear about this every 4 years or shortly in the lead up. Maybe we need to do a better job of promoting at our universities and highlighting our Olympic athletes and who they are and what they do and getting them out into our communities. I think that was the other point that was brought up very clearly was we need to reach all students here, all children here in all of our communities. Let's bring Olympians to them, not just to talk about the medal that's hanging around their neck, that may be why they came to see them, but to talk about all the work, everything they did to get them there. How they ate nutritionally, how they exercised, the benefits of physical health were so important. I also think they wanted to, get a little more resources from the Olympic Committee, the NGBs, on both mental and physical health. And what resources can we provide, as these are very important topics today, as we all know. And then hopefully that the 2028 games will really focus on a lot of these areas with messaging. I think that was another thing they brought up. As far as the tools, we talked about tools, and this was a challenge because when we introduced this, what tools are you currently using from the U.S. Olympic Committee, U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee, and NGBs? Many didn't know what tools were available to them. They did go to tools, for example, on Major League Baseball PitchSmart. They went to tools that are used from the USTA, from Junior NBA. So I think it's definitely an opportunity for this commission to call attention to doing a better job of promoting what you're already doing, and they're already in place. So it's probably a pretty easy ask about, are we not only promoting them, but are we getting it to the right people at the right level to push this out to our schools and our families that need this more than anyone. So I think that was, the tools were important. And then finally, about collaborating more effectively with national sports organizations. We encourage all of our national governing bodies to continue their partnership they have right now with the NFHS, the National Federation for State High School Associations, especially in their coursework that they do. The NFHS does an incredible job offering free courses for so many people to come and look at, whether it's about mental health, being a good sports parent, nutrition, et cetera. So I think the continued partnership with the NFHS is great. I think they also want to see cooperation across the national governing bodies. We talk about multiple sport athletes. Maybe the national governing bodies can have that discussion across the board about how do we promote this, because it's getting away from us. We don't think it's completely gone, but it's definitely getting away from us. And I think that's one of the issues that came up was calendaring of events. When national events happen in the United States, we know you don't control the international calendar. But when they happen in the United States, are we doing the best we can to make sure those events aren't occurring in the same season as traditional high school sports? We understand that some families and children are going to make the choice to play at the elite level, maybe not play. But if they wanted to play for their high school team, we believe they should have the opportunity to do so. And then just to articulate how we're all a part of this. I think that's a little bit of a disconnect in that how everyone involved, from youth sports to high school sports to NCAA sports to foundations, how do we all fit into this picture and how are we all part?
Thanks for that, Ron. And I think one of the things it brings up, and Kathryn, you mentioned this too, and we're just talking about clarity, is youth sport can be a lot of things. It can be high school sports, it can be professional sports, it can be Olympic sports, so we need some better definitions and some better understanding of what are the spaces in which kids are moving through sport. Renata, community recreation programs.
Yeah, no, thank you. Some of the similar common themes, but just to sort of level set some data, because I love data. There were about 40 people in our audience, and they were a mix of recreation and parks and recreation, community-based organizations, NGBs. There's about 5 NGBs in the room. 3 existing organizations, 2 parks and recs and 1 community-based organization, had done some work with NGBs or had some partnerships with NGBs. So about 10% had relationships, but there were 80% that didn't know any of the offerings that the NGBs had to provide. There were some themes that emerged from our conversation. One was around messaging and connection, alignment of interest, and then parent engagement. We had some heavy conversation. On the messaging and connection, it was really taking that national approach and connecting it at the localized level. Because while there's different definitions and experiences of youth sports, how kids show up, it is all engaged at the local level, and that there was a lot of conversation about the disconnect. Also with regard to localized resources, which would said, so know what's available, the grant resources, the coaching education, and then parenting. I think on the alignment of interest and common purpose, the experience of most in our breakout session was the NGBs, the USOPC is about winning medals and winning, sort of championships at elite athlete, where most of the community programs, youth programs at the community level are really about lifelong wellness, lifelong fitness, mental health, physical health, building pathways. And so how can there be a better alignment of interest? Some suggestions came out, is there a youth focus of NGBs so that it doesn't compete with the elite aspect of what the role of the NGBs play? There were some conversations around the pyramid. I think that was mentioned in both of the other breakout sessions. And so this pyramid is focused on identifying talent as quickly as possible, sometimes as young as 7 or 8 years old. And that sort of gets kids to opt out at a very young age. And so how can the NGBs really extend that pyramid to allow young people to be able to experience sports over the long term and more of a sort of recreational, fun, health and wellness type of access? And then alignment of budget and values and purposes is that the NGBs, they're going to put their budget toward elite athletes. And so if you need localized resources to expand youth sports, there seems to be that competition. And so how do you align budget and values? Some conversation around what NGBs could do at the recreation and community level was exposure to non-traditional sports. One of our attendees talked about curling. So there's not all one size fits all, and most recreation and parks will focus on the more traditional sports that kids might opt out of. Reducing expense was a big theme. Access to resource for inclusion and adaptive sport, a great role that the NGBs can play because recreation and parks, don't necessarily have the staff or the capacity to really offer those at scale. And then educating parents was really, we spent a lot of time talking about that. And one of the suggestions came up is educating parents that sport, play, and movement is not about becoming a collegiate Olympian or a professional athlete, Chris mentioned, who was my co-facilitator, the pathway for excellence, where the USOPC showed that Olympic athletes played more on average 2.8 sports. So being able to educate parents on those aspects, educating parents on mental health. And then there was some opportunity or some conversations around opportunities to look at scheduling in tournaments, the cost of travel, the cost of tournaments out of state. How might you do more localized tournaments focused on fun, focused on recreation at the local level in partnership with community-based organizations and rec and parks. And then as we were closing our conversation, there was some energy around the use and the power and the capital that NGBs have to use that to really start to frame out a policy and a youth sports system that connects that local to community, the national to collegiate to local level in a really powerful way. And I think we put the pressure on the NGBs to really develop a national youth sports system that has some policy that coordinated not just across NGBs, but with NCAA, CIF, so that there was really an opportunity for a parent to know my child wants to be in recreation, here's the path, sort of the bottom of the pyramid, but then almost a quality control check of those programs that kids, as they develop talent, what are the good programs, in curling, in skateboarding, or whatever the program is, that parents have knowledge about what are those safe, important programs that are really going to not just develop the talent from a sports perspective, but actually develop and help my child become the best selves as they're expanding on their talent. I think those were some of the big takeaways. Oh, the final takeaway was really taking a page out of Project Plays 8 Plays, and ask rec centers and community organizations what they want, what they need, and how can NGBs be helpful. And so some suggestions about doing a survey, a national survey of recreation and parks and community-based organizations. And so there was more of a bottom-up as opposed to a top-down approach to collaboration and partnership. Oh, thank you.
You can clap for that, yeah. So the theme that I'm hearing, I have a few words that came up several times from all of you: awareness, clarity, access, inclusion, education, and resources. And so I guess my question for you, and this wasn't necessarily a prompt for your rooms, but I want to throw it out there. Is there a role for government at any level as part of this, as Renata, I think you said, just building a sport policy? Kathryn, I'll start with you.
That's a big question. Well, I think that certainly, yes, if that's what the commission comes forth with, we would be, as NGBs, really welcome participants in that. But I think there needs to be a real understanding of sort of what our role is now, and if it's expanded, it's very kind of clear how that's being expanded, and we need to also have additional resources to support particularly smaller NGBs who really might only have a few people on their staff. And that's where you get tremendous variation across NGBs. I think, the way we're set up right now, we also have a mandate for a specific sport. So one of the ideas that we kind of talked about in our session was the NGBs leading a stakeholders kind of summit to have those conversations about what's needed. But it's not one size fits all for a youth sports program. Hey, what do you, because it's different for every sport. So I think we need acknowledgement of that. But in terms of the resources, I would say, Tom sent a survey out to the NGBs and they were asked, do you think the government should help? Do you think philanthropy should help? And, we would say all of the above. I mean, historically, obviously, the federal government doesn't support us financially directly, but particularly if there are new ideas about roles we can play, we would be looking for resources from the government. I think there's some great ideas. If we just went off and took all the people at this summit, we could figure out there's so many not-for-profits that want to do grant making in some of this space. Maybe NGBs, if they're meeting a certain level of metrics on some of these new initiatives, we can apply for grants, but we definitely will need more resources.
And Ron, the government is involved in sports. When you're talking about sports embedded in schools, that's the model, at least certainly with public schools. But I'm wondering, with these other areas that you identified, is there another role in terms of funding, in terms of coordination, in terms of policy that you see in your space?
Absolutely. I think there's two main areas that I would consider here. Number one would be the resources and places to play. It used to be that there were parks, and that's where we went to play after school, and there were no parents, there were no officials. We made the rules, we enforced the rules, and kids just learned how to play. And all the things that came with that about how to learn how to play together, cooperate, be a good teammate. These are all things that are going to set them up for everything they're going to do for the rest of their life. You know, one thing that came up in our group also was the need for, you know, is there kind of an overriding lesson plan that, you know, the government agencies could work with the national governing bodies and the USOPC to say, here are the desired outcomes for sports at each of these levels. Kind of what you alluded to earlier, Renata. And I think that would be huge because then it's right there, it's tangible. Here's what we're getting out of participating in youth sports and school-based sports. And here's why it's so important to continue to provide these safe spaces for students to go play. I think the other opportunity for government is to clearly delineate the difference between what is an amateur athlete and what's a professional athlete in today's world. Because that line is getting more and more blurred at the high school level, at the collegiate level as well. So I think that that's another area of involvement for them.
Thanks. Renata?
I'd plus one that, and I'd say the two areas are policy and resources. When you think about where we can meet the greatest number of kids, where I played sports growing up was at my park and in my school. You know, we had robust recess in elementary school. I played basketball in middle school. I played tennis in high school, and I went to a public high school. And I think that system is broken, and I think the federal government can step in, the Department of Education can step in to say, do we mandate and fund robust sports programs, recess programs, PE programs within our school system? And if you look at the data, you know, you've got states across the country. Seattle just was effective in passing legislation to mandate 30 minutes of recess in the school. Think about that for a minute, that we had to have legislation at the state level to mandate recess when we know all the data of what sport plan movement does to connect young people to their education. Across the country, PE is an unfunded mandate about 2 to 3 days a week, an unfunded mandate. And then when you talk about high school, you can talk about this all day long, high school athletics in a public school system. The competition with private schools has poached the talent from public schools to private school. And in now some of the most, in Los Angeles, some of the most prolific public schools that were developing collegiate Olympic athletes, you know, like Crenshaw, like Dorsey High School, now can't even field a football team because of the inordinate amount of cost for those families to be able to provide the sports. So I think policies of setting the priority of why sport plan movement is important for lifelong well-being, and then I think by a matter of that policy, you know, valuing those things and then putting budget dollars behind it. And I think if we focus on just that one thing, I think we can achieve that 63% participation by 2030 that Tom laid for us as a goal, you know, yesterday. So I think policy and funding particularly focused on our schools.
Excellent, thank you. So we are at the point of this program where we're going to turn it over to the audience for your questions, both on our live stream participants and for those of you here. And so we're going to turn it over to you and wait for the questions to come up. So let's see. What resources and support can be provided to NGBs to support participation for all in sport at the grassroots level? Kathryn, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think that was kind of what I was speaking to before. I think most NGBs really do already support participation at the grassroots level on some basis, but some do not. And, you know, if we can find some additional resources to help some of the smaller NGBs collaborate with this community and touch more athletes, certainly we are very open to that. And I think it, you know, to be clear, is probably mostly financial resources.
Thank you. Ron?
Well, I think it's something that Renata just said that really rang true is when you look at the disparity of facilities and venues in high schools across the country. I think that the more that NGBs can advocate with government agencies, foundations, so that no matter where a student goes to school, they look at their facility and say, I get to play there. You know, and I think that's important for all of our students to see.
Yeah, I'd add a big theme for this conference and in our work is around coaching education and quality programming. So I think that there's a great opportunity for the NGBs. They do that now in terms of coaching education, the connection between physical, mental health, nutrition, and can those resources be put down at the grassroots level from a quality control standpoint? Because I think parents in the work that we do are striving for those programs that create the safe space, that create the right coaching education, that create the right experience so that kids aren't dropping out. And I know those resources are provided, across the 50 or so NGBs, but how do they make it to the grassroots community recreation and park level, I think is an opportunity that's ripe for expansion.
Thank you for that. Okay, Ron, here's a question for you. The CIF was instrumental in getting the California legislature to mandate coaching education in CIF schools in 2000. Do you think that mandating minimum coaching requirements across all national sports organizations is feasible?
I would never say never. I think anything is feasible. The question is, who's the oversight agency? And I think that's where school-based sports are so important, because there is that oversight. When you come to play, you know that you're playing for a coach that was certified. You're playing for a coach that's involved in education-based athletics and has the purpose behind that. So that would be something obviously we would all love to see. I just wonder who the oversight would be to get there.
Devil's in the details, yeah. Okay, how would having a ministry of sport, common in many developed nations, change the dynamic of creating an equitable infrastructure for youth sports? Kathryn, do you want to weigh in on that?
I'd be happy to. When I hear about and look at ministries of sport in other countries in the Olympic movement, to be perfectly candid, I don't think that they're typically overly focused on the equitable infrastructure for youth sports at the base level. I don't know a lot about it, but I think they're pretty focused on elite competition. So, that's a kind of a starting question. But I think no matter what, the more policy we have emanating from our government entities to support sport, we are always going to have, I hate to use the word trickle down, but whatever we do is going to help sport at all levels. So that focus would be welcome.
Ron, any thoughts about a ministry of sport?
I think it would depend upon the purpose behind the organization. Right. If the purpose is to truly develop sport for all from the youngest of ages, then I'm all for it. If it's about further developing the elite athlete, then there's obviously hesitation there. I mean, we have to get back to where sports take place in schools at all levels, from elementary school through junior high, middle school, junior high, and up. There's so many benefits to that, not just for the children that are involved, but it also gives us access, as Renata mentioned earlier, to parents. And, it's almost like a training that needs to happen now with adults on how to behave at children's games, because of what we're seeing. And what we're seeing is just, it's inexcusable that someone thinks that they can treat an official, a coach, another child like that. But I think if they would come up through a system where they saw that's not acceptable and they'll be held accountable, I think things could change.
I think the only thing I'll add is maybe we should call it a ministry of parents' behavior in sports.
I'm going to make note of that, yeah. Top recommendation, yes. Okay, thank you for that. How can we grow the pipeline for Olympic, Paralympic sports that are not in the top 5 to high schools and primary schools? Kathryn.
Well, it's a great question. I know they say not in the top 5, but I know, for example, gymnastics isn't in anybody's school programs anymore. I'm sure there are reliability issues along the way, and that's true for an awful lot of sports. It really gets back to all the things we're talking about here in terms of collaboration with schools and local sporting organizations. And, if a school district really wants to get, my NGB sport, probably not gymnastics, but another, into their program, then they should reach out to that NGB. I mean, I think sometimes that very direct contact can be very meaningful.
Ron?
I think a lot depends on how you identify the top 5. If you're talking about strictly participation numbers or what gets the most attention, then that's a challenge. But I think if you look at school sports and you look at the traditional Olympic sports of track and field and swimming, those are some of our most popular sports because everyone can be involved. Most of the time, they're non-cut sports. So students have the opportunity to play no matter their talent level. We used to, I know a cross-country coach that used to have his parent meeting at the beginning of every season and say, the best part about my sport is the worst players on my team get the most playing time. and it takes parents a little while to figure that out, but you see the achievement. And they're also some of my favorite events to go to, because at the end of those races, the students gather and they talk to each other, they congratulate each other, because they each had one goal: to go out there and do their personal best. And if they could achieve that, close to that, they're happy for others. That's a lesson I think some of our more popular sports, if you want to use that term, can definitely use from Olympic sports.
I would say that it's giving kids the experience, and it's the work that we do at the L84 Foundation and our charitable arm, the Play Equity Fund. And as we're listening to the conversation, I'm thinking back to a play day that we did in 2021, where we experienced kids to a diversity of sports. So we had table tennis, we had breakdancing, sitting volleyball, netball, and I was absolutely amazed that it was the first time. We had, I think, 300-400 kids that came through from the programs that we support, and it was the first time the vast majority of kids had played table tennis. It was the first opportunity they had to experience breakdancing. So I think, as one of the comments came out of our breakout session, I think NGBs have an incredible opportunity to go into schools and to give kids experience of those non-traditional sports. At the foundation, we fund 50 different sports because we know that we need to have that sport diversity, because not all body types are the same. And I do think, as I read the 5 sports, I see those as basketball, football, track and field. You kind of know what and the competition in the elite level. My 2 kids, you show up to play basketball in middle school, and kids have been playing since they were 5. They automatically opt out because they're not good enough, versus sharing volleyball with my son, where he was able to sort of onboard to that. So I think it's a matter of really just exposing kids at recreation parks, in community-based organizations in school, to those non-traditional sports. Just the young man that was on yesterday, breakdancing. He went from gymnastics to breakdancing because somebody introduced him to the sport, and now he's prepared to go to the Olympics, I'm sure.
And Renata, I'm showing my age. When I was in high school, we learned square dancing. I'm glad we've moved on to break dancing, yes. Okay, so school PE programs cover 100% of the kids. How can we make that work better and get sport for all? Kathryn.
Well, I'm kind of feeling like I really would prefer to defer to these folks because they know so much more about this. You've both just been really kind of answering this question.
I would say it's not.
And it's not.
It's not
100%. Exactly.
You have the opportunity to reach 100% of the kids, but we're not doing that. And it's very difficult when we're asking our teachers and our educators to do so much to close the reading and math gap coming out of COVID, and we don't have time in the day. I have the honor of sitting on a Governor's Council of Physical Fitness and Mental Health, the Governor Sibyl Newsom's wife, and Ronnie Lott co-chair. And as part of that work, we've gone up and down the state doing listening sessions. And there's one in San Diego, Precious, who's a middle school teacher. I asked her, what is the one thing this council could do that would really change and prioritize sport, play, and movement in schools? And she says to restructure the school day to allow time for play, recess, PE, and after-school sports. So I think that we have a tremendous opportunity, but I think it's policy, legislation, and funding that needs to be directed to that thing that we know that works, to anchor and connect kids to themselves, their school culture, their academics, and ultimately to help them build pathways to success.
Anything to add, Ron?
No, I think just we have to include parents in this conversation.
Oh,
So many parents are so driven towards the academic side, which obviously is incredibly important. But there's so much data and evidence out there that children that are more physically fit are better ready for school when the school day starts. During the school day, when they have some exercise, they have recess, they come back energized and ready to go. So I think we have to, go back to the basics of showing people how the two really do work hand in hand.
Thank you for that. Are there other questions coming through? I don't want to skip anybody. How do we connect Olympics, Paralympic resources to more rural communities? Kathryn?
That's a very good question. I think that, again, it's some of this collaboration that we're talking about. I think it's probably one of the hardest questions that anyone could ask. We simply, as an NGB, can't be building, facilities for people to participate in our sport in every community across the country. So if it's not there, that's really a problem. But I do believe that we have just so many resources centralized at the NGB level and educational materials on our website. And certainly if somebody in a really remote place reached out to us, we could certainly try to help them get a program going. Again, I just always have to come back to how different every sport is. Gymnastics is actually a very expensive sport for a club, a separate private business owner, to build a gym and operate it. The insurance is very expensive. Unfortunately, that means that it's also expensive for children to participate, or relatively expensive. So these are hard questions in that regard. Some sports are a lot easier, to do. Yeah. If you're a runner or something like that, you can probably do it almost anywhere. But certainly, we would be open to outreach for these kinds of situations.
Yeah, and what I hear you say, the message you're sending to the commission is that this is very nuanced across NGBs, and have to keep that in mind, certainly. Ron, any thoughts to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to find the champion on the school site campus that wants to provide this and that will advocate for this. We're very fortunate in California that we have Special Olympics Northern California, Special Olympics Southern California, and the Challenged Athletes Foundation that support any of our schools that want to introduce programs like this with resources, with equipment. So I think it's incumbent upon our schools to also do the homework to reach out to these organizations and ask, how do I get this started here?
Yeah, the one thing that I would add is, we have, you probably know better than I do, how many Olympic and Paralympic athletes that we have come through the Olympic movement. And I think that is a ready army to engage in a school setting. One of the legacies that we have in Los Angeles from the 2012 Olympic Games in London is Ready, Set, Goal, where Olympians go into the schools and engage young people in their Olympic sport. They talk about their journey, they do some activities around that Olympic sports. And so I'd say, really engaging and empowering the Olympic athletes to connect with those rural communities to inspire what's possible to the young people that are there.
So I'd love to make a follow-on to that, since you are the leader of a major foundation, whether it's you or some of the others out here in the audience. I love that idea. I know the USOPC is working on this kind of thing all the time, as we are. Let's find some funds to pay these athletes appearance fees, because they'd be happy to do it. But they're all trying to, make their way once they're not Olympians anymore and pursue their careers, and they deserve to be paid in these situations. So we have to figure out, both sides of that equation.
Resources, resources, resources. Okay, I think we have time for one last question, and then we'll close. We've heard a lot about what needs to be done in our sector to be aligned through some people and groups, though some people and groups will have to stop doing things. What do you think your area needs to stop doing?
Boy,
that's a great question.
It's a great question. It's one of those things we always used to ask ourselves in corporate America. I honestly can't think of a single thing that we're doing that we should stop doing. It feels like there's just so much more. I guess what I would say to all of us collectively is make sure that as we want to initiate great new things, that we're not redundant, that we take the time and we're intentional enough to make sure that we're coordinated in our efforts, because we each have very specific roles. And so that would be my response.
Okay.
I think stop doing. It's high school sports has two primary goals. One of our partners for a long time has been the Positive Coaching Alliance, and they talk about the double goal model. That certainly in high school sports, winning is a goal, and it's always going to be a goal. We keep score. We have scoreboards. Winning is important. However, teaching life lessons to our student athletes has to be the most important thing. So I think sometimes we have to get back to stop overly focusing maybe on the winning, even though we know it's important and people want to win championships, but get back to really the true purpose of what is high school sports, and that's the life lessons that every student who participates has the opportunity to come away with.
Yeah, and much to the chagrin of my team, we're doing more, not less. The children are waiting, and I think they need us more now than ever, particularly as we continue to fully emerge out of the pandemic. But I think what we need to do more of is what Project Play is really laying the groundwork for, collaboration. When I entered this space almost 8 years ago, we were sort of kind of finding our way and doing our own thing. And almost 8 years later, 10 years with Project Play, to see the collaborations in Seattle, Philadelphia, Chicago, Milwaukee, to see the collaboration here at Project Play with the USOCP and the NGBs. I think the future is bright if we continue to focus on how can we come together using sport to better the lives of families and communities that need it most.
Thank you. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to close this session. This has been incredibly helpful for us as a commission. Commission is a word that elicits very interesting responses, I have learned. Somewhere between a shrug, that you're sort of a go-nowhere government bureaucracy, you're not the real deal, or you're absolutely too real and you're this rogue band of investigators that's going to break down doors, raid offices, and file gotcha-style reports. I'm here to tell you we are neither of those things. I think at its best, if you look at the definition of what a commission is, it's a group of people charged with a particular function. Our group really represents people with truly extraordinary sport expertise, and we are trying to bring that together with the most fair process possible, given our resources, the word of the day, and our time constraints. And so we're really seizing this unique opportunity. As I said earlier with Tom, we tend to make sport policy in this country in a very reactive posture, a very crisis-oriented posture. We've made some very important policy changes that way, but this commission is an opportunity to be proactive and to take the opportunity to think big. And I think our panelists here have provided us with big ideas. All of you have provided us with your thoughts and big ideas. I want to thank these panelists and our facilitators. I want to thank the folks who have engaged with us already. I want to thank our incredible commission staff. And most importantly, I want to thank Tom Ferry and the Aspen Institute for giving us a platform to hear what you all have to say. Thank you so much.